I hate to say it, but Superman was pretty underwhelming. I'm not someone that went into this film with super optimistic expectations, expecting it to be a home run out of the park or anything, but I'm also not one of these Zack Snyder extremists that was going into the movie with the preconceived notion that I was going to hate it. No, I, like most people, went into Superman with a cautiously optimistic attitude that was interested to see what someone like James Gunn could bring to this new blank slate DC universe. And while Superman is definitely an entertaining watch, with overall pretty strong performances, a decent enough story that keeps you invested, as well as a pretty strong new take on the character of Superman, it falters in a lot of areas that hold it back from being great. When the credits roll and you drive home for the night, it's not really a movie that sticks with you. For everything that I thought Superman did well, there's something else in contrast that I felt was handled poorly or underdeveloped, which all culminates into something that I'd consider to be a pretty average superhero flick. It's a film that's not really going to move the needle that much for the superhero genre currently. And if you told me that 7 or 8 years ago, as long as it made money, then I think that would be a completely adequate result, considering that superhero movies were very much the dominating force of Hollywood at the time, and DC movies were not being critically well received whatsoever. But when you take into account that this is a film that has so much weight riding on it, a film that has to successfully launch an entire new cinematic universe, while also coming out in a time where superhero movies are no longer the box office profit guarantee that they once were, and in a time when the general public has really turned sour to the superhero genre over the past half decade. After all the shit that's been pumped out, all goes to show that Superman has a lot of obstacles to overcome, and while it's currently on track to make a profit for DC, I don't think that it's going to make the cultural impact that they were hoping for. I don't think this film will sell people on the idea of the whole new James Gunn DC universe. And I won't be surprised if this cinematic universe struggles to gain some legs in the near future, when it can't rely on such culturally iconic characters like Superman for later installments. Before I get into some of the things that I think Superman struggles with, I want to start on the positive side of things. I don't want people to get the impression that I'm all doom and gloom right now, because there are certainly a lot of aspects to like here. The big key positive takeaway for me is I thought that David Cornsweet really embodied the character of Superman well. Besides just the physical attributes matching up quite nicely with the source material, which certainly is a positive, David Cornsweet also brings the sincere and unwavering hopeful attitude to the character that is required to properly pull off Superman. Superman, when written at his finest, should be an entity of near perfection, an archetype of mankind at its finest, that all of humanity can look up to and try to emulate to the best of their ability. And I think the writers did a good job of pulling that off. Even when all of humanity is against him in this film, and his whole worldview of his purpose in life starts to fall apart, while he is vulnerable, he never strays away from the man he's always strived to be. Even in the darkest of moments, he always stays true to his character, and that's something that I quite liked. He also has very good chemistry and plays well off of Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane. Although I certainly don't think they get enough time together, which is a complaint I'll get into shortly, the time that they do have together is certainly well spent, and leads to some of the most emotionally impactful and just overall best scenes of the movie. The performances overall are just really solid. Nobody really stuck out to me as being noticeably bad. Sure, there are certainly some characters that don't get a lot of development, but I wouldn't say that makes them bad characters, just thin characters. Not a whole lot to go off of. The main characters that the film focuses on, Superman, Lois, Lex, and Mr. Fantastic, all had really strong performances by each of their respective actors. And any faltering that their characters suffer from is generally a result of the writing, not the acting. The performances, I think, are what really keeps this film glued together into something that is digestible for the audience. And I think that really sticks out to me when you take into account that they were able to keep you invested in this otherwise very messy and bloated script. The action, I think, was serviceable, and mostly what I expected to see out of a film like this. It didn't really stick out as good or bad. The fisheye lens, I will say, was a little bit overused, and the soundtrack I don't think did any favors, but there are some really impressive visual shots, especially when Superman is taking off from the ground and shooting straight up into the sky. You just can't help but smile. And I think it helps average out some of those negatives into something that I think general audiences will be satisfied with. Now, while Superman gets a lot of the basics right, solid enough action set pieces, a very likable version of Superman, as well as other strong performances, there are a lot of issues that Superman struggles with. Issues that I think a lot of people could see coming just based off of the promotional material. The biggest problem with Superman is there's just too much shit going on. There's way too many characters that the plot has to juggle, and way too many different elements to the story that the script has to bounce between. It's not hard to follow or anything, but there's not enough time that the film is able to spend on each specific element of the story, which results in each element feeling a little thin and underdeveloped. We have Superman's story as the driver of the plot, Lex Luthor's storyline, the relationship between Clark and Lois, everything with the Justice Gang, a pocket universe, Lex Luthor's sidekicks, a romantic subplot, Clark's parents back in Kansas. It's just too much, and it results in the whole film feeling like an unfocused mess. Considering that this is not only the first Superman film in the DCU, but also just the first film in general in this new DCU, I think the film would have been much better if it was a much more narrowly focused Superman story, to really help us get to know and connect with this new version of Superman, and to help ease us into this new universe. The film could have benefited from so much being cut. The whole Justice Gang probably should have been cut and saved for later down the line. Maybe you could keep Mr. Fantastic around, not only because I think he was the clear standout of the three, but he was more important to the plot, but Green Lantern and Hawkgirl should go. I think the Engineer also could have been scrapped. She's barely even a character. Just keep Ultraman around as Luthen's sidekick. He doesn't need to. Also, the romantic subplot between Jimmy and Eve didn't really need to be here, and you could have just had the valuable information that comes out from that subplot be discovered by Lois's investigative journalism skills instead. Another big issue that the film really struggles with is the pacing is really bad. It is a constant sprint for the vast majority of the runtime, and rarely takes a second to slow down and breathe. This really plays into what I was saying earlier, is that I think the film would have benefited if it took some time to ease into the universe, get us established with the world we just entered. This film doesn't take much time for our characters to dwell on the emotionally impactful things that have happened to them, because it's more concerned about moving the plot along as quickly as possible. It feels like this film was tailored for someone with a really short attention span, who is constantly interested in moving from the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Also, another weird thing is we essentially start in the middle of the story, which is a little jarring how we're just thrown in there. And I know the creators didn't want to go through retelling the origin story for Superman again. I understand that, and I don't think you necessarily have to do that to make the first film work, but in this instance, it really feels like we've just entered the second film in a trilogy or something, not the first. I want to compare this film for a second with a film that is actually similar in the sense that it decided not to retell the origin story for its first outing with the retelling of a beloved character, and that's The Batman from 2022. The Batman, similar to Superman, starts the film with our character a few years into the job. They aren't super experienced yet, but they are well known and established within their respective settings. However, the Batman doesn't just come out guns blazing like we see here and almost never slow down. After the opening scene, that film really takes some time for us to get settled in and established in the new universe we just entered, before it starts to pick up the pace entering the second act. Superman does not do this well, resulting in the first and second acts feeling pretty mushed together, which felt very odd to watch from a narrative storytelling standpoint. David Cornsweet as Clark Kent and Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane have really good chemistry. I just wish I got to see more of it. Anytime the two are on screen together, it leads to some of the best moments of the film. One example that jumps out in my head is the interview scene where Lois is interviewing Superman in her apartment. Her challenging him on some of his philosophies and him having to stand up for the core principles that he believes in is one of the best scenes of the film. But since the film is constantly jumping around between so many different things, we don't get a whole lot of scenes like this. Which is a shame, because the relationship falls on the back burner in the grand scheme of things, but I think it would have served the film well if it was one of the more focused on aspects of the film. All in all, despite all of its shortcomings though, it seems likely that Superman will go on to be the standout summer blockbuster for the year. Time will tell though whether it will be seen as a true success, because there are many ways that you can look at it. Financially, it seems inevitable at this point that Superman is going to make a decent profit. But I think the more important thing to take into account is whether or not Superman is going to have the cultural impact and warm reception that DC really needs to have. And I guess only time will tell. I'm going to give Superman a 5 out of 10. A pretty average film that maybe I'll watch again someday. And with that, that's going to do it for my initial thoughts on Superman. If you stuck around to the end of this video and you enjoyed, then do me a favor by leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. It certainly helps out the channel a lot. Also, let me know what your guys' thoughts were on Superman in the comments below. There's a lot of differing opinions going around on the internet right now, so I'm interested to hear where you guys fall on that spectrum. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.